So we return today to the book of James and to how James invites us into an active discipleship. And today James speaks to us about speech, about the tongue. And he starts off by using these kind of great classical Greek images, the horse and the ship. And these are both ideas that in the Greek literature of his time would have been used to be illustrations. And so he uses them as well, that the horse has the bridle, so that if we can control the mouth of the horse, we can control where the horse goes. And that the ship, as we talked about in the children's sermon, has this rudder that is small, and yet it guides the great ship. And similarly, we, James argues, are guided by our mouths and by our tongues and what we say. And he points out that our tongues have great power, that they can set fire to things, and yet if we use them wrongly, that they themselves will be set fire by hellfire, which is kind of a scary idea. And I invite you today, as we're talking about speech, as we're talking about words and ideas that we convey, to consider this on two levels. First of all, our choice of language, that is, taking the name of the Lord in vain, other abusive uses of language, and also what it is that we use that language to do, use any language to do, whether we are speaking neutrally, speaking harshly of others, or whether we are using our words to celebrate God. And while James was very much speaking of teachers and how they speak and how they use elocution, I invite you to consider not just how words come out of your mouth, but how they are conveyed in writing as well, particularly in this age of social media, when sometimes many people are more likely to see what we have written than they are to hear what we have spoken. So James points out through these illustrations that our speech can control us, that we are controlled by the words that we use. The NIV, a different translation than we use when we read usually at the pulpit, says that the tongue is a world of evil among the parts of the body, that it is a devilish thing that can control how we are living. And the tongue is both a cause of problems, a cause of sin. What we say can in and of itself be a sin, but it is also a microcosm of the other sins in our life. Speech is such a simple act, right? There are not many things that we can do with our body that take less effort than actually saying something. It takes less effort to yelp than it does to lift a hand or to raise a foot. It is perhaps the most convenient thing we can do, to use our tongue and our teeth and our lips to convey an idea. And it seems like such a little thing. And yet it controls so much of who we are. I would invite you to consider that many of the great sins in our life are tied to what we say and how we express it. Murder, although I'm sure it happens, rarely happens when people mutually pose around one another and then break down into murderous rage. It's led into by an exchange of words, an exchange of ideas. Adultery rarely starts without an exchange of words. If we look at the 10 Commandments, honoring thy mother and father is something that is done in action and in words. What it is that we say leads us into who we are. Our speech displays both who we are, and it is also something that either builds or destroys the relationships that are around us. Our speech lets people see not only about us, but it tells others around the people around us. And it also tells people about our faith and how it is that we believe. I will tell you that I have a personal quirk that probably comes from my mom, who used to say that there are tens of thousands of words in the English language, and surely we can find something better than a swear word to convey our ideas. That's not to say that I don't ever swear, because I do, but I try to keep it to a minimum. There's a story that I've told to some of you, and I'll share again, that when Tracy and I first had a house in Kansas City, and I was repairing some electricity in the house in a pretty stupid way. Tracy ran into the kitchen, having heard me shout. She says, "Are you all right? Are you doing okay?" And I said, "Yes, I'm fine." And she goes, "Well, I now know that anytime I hear you use a swear word, it is for show or for effect." I'm like, "What do you mean?" She goes, "You just had 120 volts running through you and you went, 'Shoot!'" So I may have a particular personal quirk about this, but the language that we use does tell people about us. It talks about not only us, though, but the people that are around us and the people that we let influence us. Our dialects reflect the dialects that we've grown up with. Our language choice reflects the language that we've grown up with. And whether we show love or ambivalence or anger through our language reflects the influence that we allow others to have on us. It reflects the media that we encounter, whether it is that we are watching on television something edifying or reading something that lifts us up, or whether we're watching people that we would never invite over for dinner. These influences on us influence how we speak and how we interact with others. But our speech also reflects our faith. I should say, I know pastors, I have friends who are pastors who are comfortable using adult language, shall we say, in their sermons, and I find this kind of quirky. For them, it is a way to connect with perhaps a younger and more urban congregation. That's not particularly a theory that I buy into, but they find it to be a useful tool. In some ways, they are able to use even that language, though, to convey the faith that they have experienced and the grace that they have received. And so the question is, does the speech that we share, do the words that we share, reflect that we are friends with God? Does it reflect that we are friends with the world? Or does it reflect that maybe we're friends with both? That we have the ability to be in the world, but also to share the love that has been given to us through God. The words that we speak reflect what we think of other people. Whether we find them someone to be challenging to us or someone that we should embrace. But the truth is, we were all created in God's image. And each of us is a child of God and therefore deserves honor. John Wesley said that we were all created in God's image, and although we have lost his likeness, there remains an indelible nobleness that calls for reverence. And I like that phrase, that in every person there is an indelible, permanent nobility that is the mark of God who has created us. And that bit of God in us deserves respect and reverence. And so the challenge for us then is in controlling our speech, in saying things that convey God's love to others, and in saying things that do not disrupt the love that God is showing. James, at the beginning of his verse, has this phrase that I love. Anyone who makes no mistakes in speaking is perfect. For all of us make many mistakes, he starts it. For all of us make many mistakes. But unlike the tone we sometimes get from Paul, James doesn't say, for all of us make many mistakes, so that's okay. As we are learning, as we read through James, James does not have much room for mediocrity. James believes that if we are living in the shadow of a Christ who gave his life for us and a God who gave his love and his Son for us, we should not be doing anything halfway. That we should be committed to what we are doing. And yet, in an effort to control our tongues, our speech, we recognize that we're in a society that values freedom of speech. That our Bill of Rights guarantees that we can say most things publicly. And that we're given free will that gives us the ability to say things publicly. And part of our challenge as living into the discipleship as described by James, is recognizing that even though we have the power to say something, even though we have the legal right to say something, doesn't mean that we should always say it. And that's a hard lesson for us to hear in September of 2015. We, as a society, want to push the boundaries. We want to push the envelope. We want to have as many freedoms as we can. And yet James calls us to pull that back, to recognize that there is freedom in the exercise of the free will that leads to silence. Silence was, in some Hebrew traditions, the best medicine for physical healing in all ways. Silence, as we even use it today, is a key to knowing God better. And as we learn to intentionally control how we speak, and I use that word intentionally, to make a concrete thought before we are engaging with other people. As we do that, we reflect on the words that James gave us that we heard a couple of weeks ago. To be quick to listen, to be slow to speak, and to be slow to anger. And being slow to speak is the one of those that trips me up. If you've had conversation with me, you know that I like to be sometimes a steamroller in that conversation. But probably each of us has a different perspective on what part of that is difficult for us. For some of us, it's hard not to speak, but for some of it's difficult to keep our ears open and to listen to others, to let those ideas change who we are. For some of us, it is very difficult to be slow to anger, that we have a temperament that wants to rise quickly and to escalate a situation. But those words from James should influence all of us. Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. And when we do choose to speak, we should be speaking boldly, and we should be speaking with holiness in mind. We should be attempting to convey ideas that we believe in, and we should be attempting to convey ideas that God shares with us and that we might share with others. In just a moment, we'll be celebrating communion together. We will be partaking in the cup and in the bread, the elements from Christ's Last Supper that remind us of his sacrifice for us. And as we do that, we will be sharing in a great thanksgiving and in other prayers and in other elevated language to thank God for this opportunity and for the gift of his Son. But it's important to remember that when we are speaking to God, when God is speaking through us, there is no elevated tone required. It is no better to say, "O God, thou art great," than to say in an exasperated tone, "God, help me." The nature of our speech, the elevated nature of our speech, is unimportant. What matters is that when we share ideas, when we share words, that we convey love, that we convey thoughts that are just and gracious and loving. I hope that each of you lives your life in a way that you believe reflects a Christ who has loved you, who does love you. And in so doing, each moment of our life, each word that we share, each idea that we convey, should also help others know that Christ is alive and living in us. Will you pray with me? God, we thank you for the free will that you have given us, that we can choose in every moment to honor the love that you have shared with us. And we thank you for giving us a society and a country where we can speak as we wish to speak. But God, help us to understand that just because we can say something does not mean we should. Bless us and help us to remember James's advice, to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger, so that we may convey the love of your Son, who gave his life on the cross for us. It's in his name that we pray. Amen.